The watch ticks against my wrist, like a countdown to something I don't want to meet. I'm staring at it now. This dull silver Helvetia that my grandfather pressed into my palm 3 months ago, when the cancer had eaten away everything but his stubbornness. His hands were nothing but bone and liver spots by then, but his grip was still strong enough to make sure I couldn't refuse it. The only thing he had left to give, he said. The only thing that stayed with him through everything. I should have known better than to take it. Sarah's been staying at her sister's place for a week now. She won't return my calls. The last thing she said to me was that I'd changed, that there was something dark hanging around me like smoke. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew. Women always know before we do. The arguments had started small. I'd forgotten to pick up milk. She'd leave the dishes in the sink. Normal couple stuff. Except it wasn't normal for us. We'd been together for 2 years without so much as a raised voice. Then suddenly we're snapping at each other over nothing, saying things designed to hurt, sleeping on opposite sides of the bed like there was a wall between us. Then there was the air conditioning unit that should have killed me. I was walking down Bleecker Street, thinking about whether I should call Sarah again or give her more space, when I heard this grinding metal sound above me. Pure instinct made me look up and step backward. The unit crashed into the sidewalk exactly where I'd been standing, sending chunks of metal flying. A piece caught my cheek. It left a scrape that's still healing. The building super said the mounting had been fine during the last inspection, said he'd never seen anything like it before. The car accident was even worse. I was driving to work last Tuesday, stopped at a red light, when this delivery truck ran right into my rear bumper. The impact should have sent me into the intersection where a city bus was coming through. Should have been a 3-car pileup with me pancaked in the middle. Instead, my airbag deployed for no reason anyone could figure out, cushioning me just enough that when the truck hit, I only got whiplash and a mild concussion. The truck driver swore his brakes had failed, but the mechanic found nothing wrong with them. I keep thinking about what my grandfather told me that last day in the hospital, how he'd gotten the watch in Germany, spring of 1945. His unit had been moving through some bombed-out town whose name he could never pronounce. They'd found this SS officer in a cellar, already dead for days. My grandfather had been the one to search the body for intelligence. The watch had been too nice to leave behind. There'd been an Apache in his squad, a guy named Joe from Arizona. Joe had taken one look at the watch and shaken his head, told my grandfather that taking from the dead was bad medicine, that the dead don't let go easy. He'd offered to perform some kind of cleansing ritual, said he knew the old ways. My grandfather had laughed it off. He was a practical man, a Methodist from Ohio who'd never put much stock in superstition. At first, it had seemed like Joe was wrong. Sure, my grandfather's rifle jammed during the firefight outside Munich, but he'd managed to clear it in time. And sure, he'd caught dysentery worse than most of the other guys, but he'd pulled through. It was just small things, the kind of bad luck that finds everyone in a war. It was after he came home that the real trouble started. The job at the factory had been a sure thing. The foreman was a buddy from high school, had promised my grandfather work as soon as he got back. But when he showed up that first Monday, the foreman claimed he'd never made any such promise, said there weren't any openings. My grandfather found work eventually, but it took months, and it was just day labor, nothing steady. He'd married my grandmother right after he got back, his high school sweetheart who'd waited for him through the whole war. They'd been happy at first, or so the family story goes. But then came the accident. My grandfather had been crossing the street downtown when a drunk driver ran a red light, broke both his legs, his pelvis, and 3 ribs. He was in the hospital for 2 months, then laid up at home for 6 more. The medical bills ate through their savings. The stock he'd invested in, some mining company that looked like a sure bet, went belly up overnight. He couldn't find steady work after that, despite having skills and experience. Potential employers would seem interested over the phone, but when he showed up for interviews, something would change. They'd find reasons to pass him over. Too many people ahead of him, positions suddenly filled, budget cuts, things like that. My grandmother took cleaning jobs, worked as a seamstress, and did whatever she could to keep food on the table. But my grandfather couldn't handle it. He'd come back from the war ready to build a life, and instead he was watching his wife work herself to the bone while he sat around the house like a broken thing. He started drinking, not social drinking, but the serious kind, the kind that makes you mean. The drinking led to fights. The fights led to my grandmother taking the kids, my father and his 2 sisters, and moving in with her parents. She tried to get my grandfather to come with them, but he wouldn't leave the house, wouldn't leave the watch. And that's what no one in the family could understand. Even when he'd lost everything else, even when his own children wouldn't speak to him, he held onto that watch, wore it every day. My father told me once that near the end, when my grandfather was living alone in that house, with nothing but empty bottles and old newspapers, he'd still wind that watch every morning, still kept it clean and polished. The family wrote him off, called him cursed, said he'd brought something bad back from the war, and refused to let it go. And maybe they were right. I was the only grandchild who bothered to visit him those last few years. The old man was mostly broken by then, but he still had moments of clarity. He'd tell me stories about the war, about the places he'd seen and the men he'd served with. He never talked about Joe the Apache, but he mentioned him sometimes in passing, always with this look in his eyes like he was remembering something he'd rather forget. When the cancer diagnosis came, it was one of those rare kinds that nobody gets. The doctors had seen maybe 5 cases like it in their entire careers. It ate through him fast, too fast for any treatment to make a difference. 3 months from diagnosis to death. He called me to the hospital that last day. The rest of the family had given up on him years ago, but I'd kept visiting, kept checking in. Maybe I felt sorry for him. Maybe I was just curious about the black sheep grandfather everyone whispered about at family gatherings. He was barely conscious when I got there, but he'd been waiting for me. Had the watch ready on the bedside table, still ticking away. His voice was nothing but a whisper when he told me he wanted me to have it. Said it was the only thing he had left that was worth anything. I should have said no. Should have remembered all the family stories, all the warnings about the old man's curse. But he looked so small in that hospital bed, and it was such a simple request. The last request he'd ever make. I've been wearing it for 3 months now. Initially, I told myself the family stories were just superstition, that my grandfather's troubles had been his own fault. Bad decisions, bad luck, maybe some untreated trauma from the war. The watch was just a watch. But now Sarah won't return my calls. Now I'm having my own close calls, my own streak of bad luck that doesn't make sense. I lie awake at night, listening to that steady tick, 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 and wondering if it's counting down to something. I keep thinking about Joe the Apache, wherever he is now. I wonder if his offer still stands, if there's some way to undo what my grandfather set in motion all those years ago. I keep wondering if it's already too late, if some curses are too old and too deep to wash away. The watch keeps ticking, and I keep wearing it, because it was his, because it's all I have left of him, because I seem to be just as stubborn as he was. Maybe that's part of the curse too. I don't know why I bought it. That's the first thing I keep circling back to. I don't normally buy strange antiques. I'm not a collector, and honestly, I usually just glance at shops like that when I pass them on the street. But that day I stopped. I can't explain it except to say something about the mask pulled me in. It was an Oni demon mask from Japan. At first, I thought it was just one of those cheap tourist replicas. You know, the kind you see hanging in gift shops. But when I picked it up, I could feel the weight in it, the grooves of the carving under my fingertips. It wasn't smooth or mass-produced. It was alive in a way. The teeth were sharp, almost too sharp for decoration, I thought. And the horns had a slight curve that made it feel like it was watching you, no matter how you turned it. The antique shop owner didn't say much, just shrugged and told me I could have it for $20. So I bought it without hesitation. I remember walking out of there feeling oddly lucky, like maybe I'd stumbled into one of those stories you hear about. You know, people finding treasure for pennies that turn out to be priceless. I couldn't wait to get it home and check it out. When I did, I spent hours just looking at it under the light. The more I examined it, the more certain I was that it had been hand-carved. The lines were imperfect in ways machines don't make them. Whoever made it, it wasn't just decoration. It had a purpose, which only reinforced my thought it might be worth something. A week later, I scheduled an appointment to have it appraised. I didn't want to get my hopes up too high, but I was excited. I carried it carefully down the stairs of my apartment building, and that's when it happened. My foot slipped, the world tilted, and in a heartbeat I was on the landing, arm bent at a sickening angle, the mask lying beside me on the concrete. The mask didn't have a scratch on it. My arm, though, was broken clean through. I told myself it was bad luck, nothing more. People fall downstairs all the time. After I got my cast, I rescheduled the appraisal. Except the day before I was supposed to go, I tested positive for COVID. Quarantine, fever, 2 weeks in bed. When I finally started feeling better, the cough came back, heavier this time. The doctor said it was pneumonia, a round of antibiotics and another delay. By the time I finally made it to the appraiser, over a month had gone by since I bought the thing. He was polite but matter-of-fact. Yes, it was hand-carved. Yes, it was authentic. No, it wasn't especially valuable. A few $100s at most, if I found the right buyer. I should have felt relieved. It wasn't a life-changing discovery, but I hadn't been duped either. $20 for a genuine piece of craftsmanship wasn't bad. Still, as I left, I couldn't shake the thought, all that chaos, being hurt and sick, just to learn it wasn't worth much. I hung it on the wall in my apartment anyway. At first, it felt like a conversation piece. Friends would glance at it, ask about it. I'd tell the story. But after a while, I started noticing little things. Knocks, bumps, the kind of noises you swear are coming from the other side of the wall. Except there's no apartment next to mine on that side. More than once, I came home to find the mask on the floor. I checked the nail, the hook, the placement. Nothing wrong. It should have stayed put. But somehow it always fell. I kept trying to rationalize it. Old building, drafts, maybe vibrations from traffic outside. But I didn't quite believe it myself. Then there was the night I had a date over. We'd been out for drinks. Things had gone well, and I invited him back. It was light, casual, the way it should be. He was looking around my apartment, making little comments, when his eyes landed on the mask. Everything in him changed. His posture stiffened, his face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" he asked. His voice was tight, like he was forcing it out. "An antique shop," I said. "Why?" He shook his head, already reaching for his jacket. He started muttering excuses about an early morning, about forgetting something at home, but it didn't add up. I pressed him. I asked again and again what was wrong, until he finally cracked. "I'm sensitive to spirits. I can see ghosts and stuff like that. I don't tell most people because they usually laugh. But that mask, I see darkness over it," he said. "Something's attached to it. I don't know what, but it's not good. I can't stay here with that thing." The air between us shifted. I felt cold even though the heat was on. We ended up leaving together, back to his place. But what he said confirmed everything I'd been pushing aside. The mask isn't on my wall anymore. It's in a box taped shut in the storage room in the basement of my building. I shoved it behind old furniture and dusty boxes I never open. But even down there, I don't feel free of it. I've started having dreams. In them, I'm back in my apartment, asleep. The air smells like smoke. I wake to the sound of fire alarms, and the hallway outside is already glowing orange. The building is burning, fast, and when I try to leave, the exits are gone. Every door opens back into my apartment, and the mask is always there on the wall. I wake up shaking, sweating. I don't know what to do. I don't want to sell it. That feels like passing the problem on to someone else, cursing them with whatever I've brought into my home. But I don't know how to get rid of it either. Throwing it away feels wrong, like it would find its way back. I've thought about burning it or smashing it. I don't even know if that would work, and the thought of trying to makes my chest tight with dread. So it sits down in the dark, waiting, and I lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening for knocks I can't explain. I should have known better than to buy something from Meredith's garage sale. That woman never threw anything away without good reason, and here I was, 63 years old, and still making the same mistakes I'd been making since I was a teenager browsing church rummage sales. But the vase had caught my eye from across her driveway, sitting there between a box of Christmas ornaments and a stack of Reader's Digest magazines, like it didn't belong with the rest of her junk. It was about 8 inches tall, maybe 6 inches across at the mouth, with this unusual glazing that seemed to shift color depending on how the light hit it. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Nothing like the mass-produced pottery you see everywhere these days. Someone had taken real care with this piece. On one side, there was a delicate painting of spring flowers in full bloom, tulips and daffodils and cherry blossoms, rendered in soft pastels that seemed to glow from within the glaze. When you turned it around, the other side showed the same flowers, but in autumn, wilted and brown and drooping their petals. I'd been collecting pottery for years, ever since Harold passed, and I needed something to fill the quiet hours. I knew quality when I saw it, and this vase was quality. The asking price was $15, which was either a steal or exactly what it was worth, depending on what was wrong with it that I couldn't see. Meredith was sitting at her card table counting change when I brought it over. She looked at the vase, then at me, then back at the vase with this expression I couldn't quite read. She told me it had belonged to her mother-in-law, that it had been sitting in her basement for years. Said she never cared much for it, thought it was depressing with those dead flowers on the back. When I asked her if there was anything wrong with it, any chips or cracks I should know about, she just shrugged and said it seemed fine to her. I should have asked her more questions. Should have asked why a woman who kept 40-year-old magazines was so eager to get rid of what was obviously a valuable piece. But I was already picturing it on my kitchen table, filled with the daffodils that were just starting to come up in my garden. The first bouquet I put in it lasted exactly 1 day. I'd cut the daffodils that morning, arranged them carefully in the vase, and set the whole thing on my kitchen table, where the afternoon light would catch the painted flowers just right. They looked beautiful, those bright yellow blooms complementing the spring scene on the front of the vase. By the next morning, they were brown and drooping, like they'd been dead for a week. I figured maybe I'd cut them too early, or maybe I hadn't put enough water in the vase. So I tried again with some tulips from the garden. Made sure to fill the vase all the way up this time. Even added a little sugar to the water like my mother used to do. Same result. 24 hours later, the tulips were dead. The third time I bought flowers from the grocery store. Professional arrangements that should have lasted a week minimum. I was being ridiculous, I told myself. There was nothing wrong with the vase. Maybe I had some kind of infection in my garden soil. Or maybe the water from my tap had too much chlorine. But those store-bought flowers died just as fast as the others. The fourth bouquet was roses from the florist downtown. Expensive ones. I wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. That there was some logical explanation for what was happening. I even asked the florist how long they should last, and she guaranteed they'd be good for at least 5 days with proper care. They were dead by the morning. That's when I started to get worried. Not about the supernatural nonsense that was trying to creep into my thoughts, but about the practical concerns. Maybe the vase was contaminated with something. Lead paint, maybe. Or some kind of chemical residue from whatever they'd used to fire the glaze. I'd heard stories about old pottery containing all kinds of toxic materials. I took a small kitchen knife and carefully scraped off a bit of the clay from the bottom, then got a tiny sample off the paint from inside the rim, where it wouldn't show. Sent both samples off to a testing lab that advertised in the back of one of those home improvement magazines. Cost me $40, but I needed to know. Both samples came back clean. No lead, no mercury, no cadmium. Nothing that should have been killing my flowers. I stopped using the vase after that. Moved it to the living room mantel where it could just sit and look decorative. Problem solved, or so I thought. It took me a while to notice what was happening to my other plants. I've always had a green thumb. Kept African violets and spider plants, and a big fiddle-leaf fig that Harold gave to me for our anniversary years ago. They'd all been thriving for months, some of them for years. But now my violets were looking peaked. The spider plant was dropping leaves. Even the fiddle-leaf fig, which had survived 3 moves and a bout with scale insects, was starting to droop. It wasn't until I moved the violets to the kitchen windowsill that I made the connection. Within a week, they were blooming again, fuller and more vibrant than they'd been in months. So I moved the spider plant to the guest bedroom, and it perked right up. The fig tree was harder to relocate, but once I got it into the front hall, it started putting out new growth almost immediately. The only thing they all had in common was that they'd been in the living room, in the same room as the vase. But it was what happened to Whiskers that really scared me. Whiskers is my tabby, 15 years old and healthy as a horse, despite his age. He'd always been an indoor cat, never sick a day in his life, except for the occasional hairball. But about a month after I'd moved the vase to the mantel, he started getting these weepy eyes. Then he developed this persistent cold that wouldn't go away no matter what the vet prescribed. Finally, just when the cold cleared up, he got a urinary tract infection. A bad one that had him crying every time he tried to use the litter box. That meant more vet visits, more antibiotics, more worry about a cat who'd never been sick a day before in his life. I'm not a superstitious person. I believe in science and medicine and logical explanations for things. But I'm also not stupid. When you put it all together, you can see the pattern, and there's only one conclusion that makes sense. I wrapped the vase in newspaper and put it in the garbage can on Tuesday night. Felt a little guilty about it, like I was throwing away $15 and a genuinely beautiful piece of art, but I couldn't have it in my house anymore. Thursday morning, I went out to bring the empty bin back from the curb. The garbage truck had come and gone, but there was the vase, sitting right next to my trash bin like it had never left, still wrapped in newspaper, though the paper was wet from the morning dew. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out how it had ended up there. Maybe it had fallen out when they emptied the bin, or one of the garbage men had seen it and thought it was too nice to throw away. Left it there thinking I'd want it back. But I knew better. Deep down, in the part of my brain that still remembered what it felt like to be a child afraid of the dark, I knew exactly what had happened. The vase is still sitting there by my garbage can. It's been 3 weeks now, and I haven't touched it. Haven't even looked at it directly when I walk to my car. Whiskers is healthy again. My plants are thriving. And I sleep better at night, knowing that whatever's wrong with that beautiful, terrible thing, it's not my problem anymore. Some things are meant to stay thrown away. You spend enough years collecting, you start building a list in your head, not of things you already own, but of crown jewels, the items you've always wanted but never thought you'd get your hands on. For me, that was a 1960s New York Yankees bobblehead, not the cheap reproductions you see online. I'm talking the real deal, heavy plaster, hand-painted, with that big smiling face and the crisp Yankees script across the chest. They don't make them like that anymore. I'd been searching for years. Baseball cards, signed bats, ticket stubs. I had all of those, but the vintage Yankees bobblehead was the one that always slipped away. Too expensive or already claimed by another collector. Then one day, out of the blue, I got it. A guy in an estate sales group I follow posted photos, and there it was, leaning slightly to the left, paint chipped on the base but authentic. No question about that. I messaged him within minutes, and by the end of the week it was mine. I can't describe how it felt to finally unwrap that package, like I just won the pennant myself. I placed it right on the fireplace mantle, front and center, the crown jewel of my Yankees collection. That's when things started to go downhill. At first it was little stuff. My wife and I snapping at each other over stupid things. Dishes left in the sink, laundry folded wrong. We've been married over 20 years, and sure, we've had our share of disagreements. But this was different. It was constant. Then the kids started in as well. My son and I butted heads about school, about chores, about nothing in particular. My daughter started spending more time locked in her room, saying she was tired of all the negative energy. Negative energy, that's how she put it. I laughed it off at the time, but she wasn't wrong. Even the dog changed. He used to love going on walks, tail wagging the second I picked up the leash. Now he'd just sulk in the corner, sometimes growling low in his throat. It was like the whole house was under a black cloud. And as for me, I couldn't get happy no matter what I did. The Yankees could have swept the Red Sox and I'd barely have cracked a smile. Every little thing irritated me. I was short-tempered, quick to yell. I hated the way I sounded, but I couldn't stop myself. The stress ate at me, and before long I started getting these stabbing pains in my stomach. Bad enough to double me over some nights. My wife begged me to see a doctor, so I finally went. Ulcers, he said, stress-induced. He gave me a list of foods to avoid, wrote a prescription, and told me I needed to lower my stress levels. I wanted to laugh in his face. My whole damn house felt like it was rotting from the inside out. How was I supposed to lower my stress levels? I didn't connect it to the bobblehead. Not at first. Why would I? It was just a collectible. A hunk of plaster on a shelf. But then came the night everything changed. I'd had one of those long days at work, where nothing goes right. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I could already feel my blood pressure rising, bracing myself for another argument. I sat in the car for a good 5 minutes, just staring at the house, dreading walking inside. But when I opened the door, it was different. The place felt brighter, and I don't mean the lights. Something in the air was lighter, like a weight had been lifted. The kids were laughing at the dinner table. My wife smiled when she saw me. I smiled back without even thinking about it. We had a good dinner that night. Good conversation, no fights, no tension, and for the first time in months, it felt like I was home again. It wasn't until I was getting ready for bed that I realized something was missing. The bobblehead. The mantle was empty where it had sat. Panic hit me at first. That thing was worth a lot of money, not to mention how long I'd been hunting for it. I tore through the living room, checked behind the furniture, asked everyone if they'd moved it. Nobody said a word. I was having a tough time falling asleep that night. Just couldn't settle in because I was thinking about it. Finally, lying there in the dark, my wife whispered, "I need to tell you something." She confessed she'd broken it while dusting, knocked it clean off the mantle. It had shattered into pieces. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, her voice shaking. "So I took it and threw it away." "Threw it away?" I sat up in bed. She nodded. She'd gathered all the pieces into a bag, driven out past town, and tossed it into a field. She was too afraid to leave the broken pieces at home, too afraid of how I'd react. But because of how I felt that night, because of how light and happy the house had become, I wasn't mad, not even a little. And in that moment, it clicked. I don't believe in curses. I never have. But ever since that bobblehead came into the house, it was like poison. Constant fights, bad moods, health problems. And the second it was gone, everything lifted. The ulcers have even started healing. My wife and I are back to laughing again. The kids don't avoid the dinner table anymore. Even the dog comes running to the door when I grab his leash, tail wagging like he used to. I don't know what that thing carried with it. I don't know who owned it before me, or what kind of energy it picked up in the decades since it was made. All I know is it wasn't good. People talk about prized possessions, about crown jewels of a collection. But I've learned something. Not everything that shines belongs on your mantle. One day I'll get another bobblehead, and I'll save up, watch the auctions, keep my eyes on estate sales. But when I do, I'm gonna be a little more careful. And maybe this time, I'll go with the White Sox instead. You have been watching Neon Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Spoopy Cola.